The restaurant had already closed. The last customers had walked out nearly 20 minutes ago, leaving behind half-empty coffee cups, crumpled napkins, and the fading smell of grilled steak. Outside, the streets of Brookhaven were quiet. Expensive cars rolled past glowing storefronts, and people hurried home without noticing the tiny family restaurant sitting at the corner of Maple Avenue. Inside, only one man remained. His sleeves were rolled to his elbows, soap covered his rough hands. He quietly scrubbed stacks of dirty plates, one after another, without saying a single word. No one would have guessed that the man standing over that sink had enough money to buy every building on that street, not because he looked rich, but because he looked like someone life had forgotten. His faded gray shirt was worn thin around the collar. His shoes had been repaired so many times that even the stitching looked tired. His silver hair was messy, and his old baseball cap hid most of his face. To everyone who passed by, he was just another old dishwasher. But appearances have a strange way of hiding the biggest truths, and in less than 72 hours, the entire town would discover who he really was. His name was Daniel Carter. At least, that's the name everyone knew. For almost 5 years, Daniel had worked every evening at Rosewood Family Diner. He never arrived late. He never complained, he never asked for favors. Every night after the restaurant closed, he stayed behind cleaning dishes long after everyone else had gone home. Some people laughed at him, others ignored him, most never bothered to learn his name. To them, he was invisible. "Hey, Danny," one of the young cooks tossed another greasy pan into the sink. "You missed one." The heavy pan splashed dirty water across Daniel's shirt. The kitchen exploded with laughter. Daniel looked down at the stain, then he smiled. "Thank you," that was all he said. The young cook rolled his eyes. "I swear, this old man never gets angry." Another employee laughed. Maybe he forgot how. More laughter filled the kitchen. Daniel simply picked up the pan and started cleaning it. No argument, no pride, no revenge, just silence. Sometimes, silence confuses people more than anger ever could. Watching everything from across the room was Emily Harper. 24 years old, a waitress, she worked double shifts almost every day. Not because she loved the job, because she had no other choice. Her mother had been fighting kidney disease for nearly 2 years. Every dollar Emily earned disappeared into hospital bills before the week even ended. She skipped meals so her younger brother could eat. She canceled birthdays. She sold her college textbooks. She even stopped dreaming. Dreams cost money she didn't have. Yet somehow, she still smiled at every customer. Not because life was easy, because kindness was the only thing nobody could take away from her. Emily watched the young cooks laughing at Daniel. Her smile slowly disappeared. She walked across the kitchen. "That's enough." The room became quiet. One cook shrugged. "We're just joking." Emily looked at the dirty water dripping from Daniel's sleeves. "No," she said softly. "You're making someone feel small just because you think no one will stop you." Nobody answered. Daniel gently placed the clean pan on the drying rack. "It's all right." Emily shook her head. "No, it isn't." For the first time that night, Daniel looked directly into her eyes. There was something unusual about them. Calm, wise, almost familiar. As if he'd spent a lifetime watching people make the same mistakes. He smiled. "A kind heart is expensive these days." Emily laughed quietly. "I can't afford anything else," Daniel nodded. "Sometimes, the people who think they're poor are already the richest." Emily smiled politely. She thought it was just another old saying. She had no idea those words carried a much deeper meaning. A few minutes later, everyone clocked out and headed home. Everyone except Daniel and Emily. She noticed him rubbing his shoulder in pain while lifting another heavy rack of dishes. Without saying anything, she tied on an extra apron. "You don't have to stay," Daniel said. "I know," Emily replied, "but that doesn't mean I shouldn't." She picked up a sponge and began washing beside him. The old dishwasher looked surprised. "Long day?" Emily laughed tiredly. "I've forgotten what a short one feels like." For nearly an hour. Neither of them spoke very much. Only the sound of running water filled the empty kitchen. Sometimes, the strongest friendships begin in complete silence. When the last plate was finally cleaned, Daniel reached into his pocket. He pulled out a neatly folded $20 bill. "Please, for helping me." Emily immediately pushed his hand back. "No, you need it more than I do." Daniel smiled. "You shouldn't assume that." She laughed. "And you shouldn't waste your paycheck." He looked at the money for a second, then quietly folded it again. "Thank you." Emily grabbed her backpack. "I'll see you tomorrow, Daniel." He nodded. "If tomorrow comes?" She frowned. "What does that mean?" Daniel simply smiled. "You never know what tomorrow is bringing." Emily waved goodbye and stepped outside into the cold night. She never noticed that an elegant black luxury sedan was parked across the street with its headlights off. Inside the car, a man in a tailored suit quietly lowered his phone. "She's the one." The driver nodded. "Should we tell Mr. Carter?" The man looked through the windshield at Daniel, who was locking the restaurant door. "Not yet. He's still waiting to see what kind of person she really is." The The black car slowly pulled away into the darkness. Emily never saw it. Daniel watched it disappear, then looked up at the night sky. A faint smile crossed his face. Everything was happening exactly as planned, but no one in Brookhaven could have imagined that the old dishwasher they mocked every single night owned a secret that would shake the entire town. The next morning, Brookhaven woke up like it always did. Luxury cars filled the streets, businessmen rushed into glass office towers, coffee shops overflowed with people discussing investments, promotions, and expensive vacations. Everyone was chasing something bigger, more money, more success, more status. No one noticed the old man sitting alone on a park bench across from Rosewood Family Diner. Daniel Carter quietly held a paper cup of black coffee. His eyes weren't on the people, they were on the restaurant. He watched every employee arrive, every customer enter, every little detail, as though he was waiting for something or someone. Inside the diner, Emily had barely slept. Her mother's condition had worsened overnight. The hospital had called before sunrise. Another treatment was needed. Another bill had arrived. Another impossible decision had to be made. Emily stared at the receipt in her locker. She sighed. 3 jobs still wouldn't be enough. Yet when she stepped onto the restaurant floor, she smiled. Customers never knew what she carried inside, and she intended to keep it that way. Around noon, the restaurant became unusually busy. Every table was full. Orders piled up. The kitchen echoed with shouting. "Table 7, need 2 burgers. Where's the soup?" Emily hurried from one table to another without stopping. Then, the front door slowly opened. An elderly woman walked inside. Her coat was old. Her hands trembled slightly. She looked around nervously before choosing the smallest table in the corner. Some customers barely glanced at her. Others looked away. Emily walked over with her usual warm smile. "Good afternoon. What can I get for you today?" The woman looked embarrassed. She hesitated. "Could I just have a cup of hot water?" Emily paused. "Only hot water." The woman lowered her eyes. "I forgot my wallet. I thought maybe I could sit here for a little while." Before Emily could answer, the restaurant manager appeared. "Mr. Lawson." A man known more for profits than kindness. His sharp voice echoed across the dining room. "This isn't a shelter. If you're not ordering food, you'll have to leave." Several customers turned to watch. The elderly woman's face turned red. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to cause trouble." She slowly stood up. Emily immediately stepped between them. "It's okay. I'll handle it." Mr. Lawson frowned. "You've got 30 seconds. Then he walked away. Emily looked at the old woman. "When was the last time you ate?" The woman tried to smile. "It's all right. I'm not hungry." Emily had heard those words before. People only said them when they were starving. Without saying another word, she walked into the kitchen. 5 minutes later, she returned carrying a bowl of homemade chicken soup, fresh bread, tea, and a slice of apple pie. The elderly woman's eyes widened. "I can't pay for this." Emily placed everything gently on the table. "I know. It's already paid." The woman looked confused. "By who?" Emily smiled. "Someone who hopes another person would do the same for her mother." The old woman's hands began shaking. Tears filled her eyes. "God bless you." Emily simply squeezed her hand. No one should leave hungry. Across the street, Daniel watched everything through the restaurant window. He said nothing, but his eyes softened. A black SUV quietly pulled beside the bench. The rear window lowered halfway. A calm voice spoke from inside. "Did you see enough?" Daniel didn't answer immediately. Instead, he watched Emily refill the old woman's tea with another smile. Then he nodded once. She helped, when nobody was watching. The voice inside the SUV replied, exactly like before. Daniel looked down. His expression changed, not sadness, not happiness, recognition, almost memory. Back inside the restaurant, Mr. Lawson discovered what Emily had done. His face turned bright red. "Emily," she turned around. "Yes, sir? You gave away food without permission? I paid for it from my tips." The manager crossed his arms. "And who's paying for the time you wasted?" Emily stayed silent. Customers nearby listened carefully. Mr. Lawson continued, "If you want to play hero, you can finish today's shift without breaks. And tomorrow, you'll be cleaning dishes after closing." Some employees looked down, others smirked. Emily quietly nodded, understood. No complaints, no excuses. She simply returned to work. That evening, Daniel arrived for his usual shift. He immediately noticed Emily looked exhausted. "You look tired," she laughed softly. "I think tired has become part of my personality." Daniel chuckled. "So they punished you?" Emily shrugged. "It was worth it." "For soup?" Daniel asked. Emily smiled. "No, for protecting someone's dignity." Daniel became quiet. Very quiet. Then he said something unexpected. "Most people think kindness costs money. They're wrong. It costs courage." Emily looked at him. "You talk like you've lived 100 lives." Daniel smiled. "Sometimes. One life is enough." Hours passed. The restaurant finally closed. Emily stayed behind for her punishment. The sink overflowed with dirty dishes. Daniel rolled up his sleeves as always, without another word. The two of them began washing side by side. The silence between them felt peaceful, comfortable. Then Emily noticed something strange. Daniel's hands. They were rough from work. But beneath the soap, she noticed an old scar across his wrist, perfectly straight, almost surgical, not the kind of scar a dishwasher usually had. She looked at it for only a second. Daniel quietly pulled his sleeve down, as if he knew she had seen it. Neither of them mentioned it. Just before midnight, a loud crash echoed outside. Both of them rushed to the back door. A delivery motorcycle had skidded on the wet road. The young driver lay beside his bike, holding his ankle in pain. People walked past, some slowed down, most kept going. Emily immediately ran outside. "Call an ambulance!" She knelt beside the injured driver without hesitation. Daniel followed calmly. He removed his old jacket, folded it carefully, and placed it beneath the young man's head. Then, he reached into his pocket. Not for money, not for a phone, but for something small, something silver. For just a brief second, Emily caught a glimpse of it. It looked like an old engraved key. Before she could see it clearly, Daniel quietly slipped it back into his pocket. The ambulance sirens echoed in the distance. Emily looked at Daniel. "What's that key for?" Daniel stared toward the flashing lights, then smiled gently. "Something I promised I would never lose." Emily waited for him to explain, but he didn't. And somewhere across town, inside the tallest office building in Brookhaven, a boardroom full of executives sat in complete silence. An empty leather chair stood at the head of the table. One director looked nervously at his watch. "How much longer are we supposed to wait?" Another executive answered quietly. "As long as it takes. The chairman always arrives, when nobody expects him." None of them realized the man they had been waiting for all day had just finished washing dishes in a small neighborhood diner. The following morning, a cold rain covered the streets of Brookhaven. Gray clouds hung low over the city, making even the tallest buildings look smaller than usual. Emily stood outside the hospital entrance, clutching a folded envelope. She had just finished visiting her mother. The doctor's words still echoed in her mind. "We can't delay the surgery much longer. If treatment doesn't begin soon." He hadn't finished the sentence. He didn't have to. Emily already understood. She looked inside the envelope. There wasn't much left. A few small bills, some loose change, not enough to change anything. She took a deep breath, wiped away a tear before anyone could see it, and hurried to work. That evening, Rosewood Family Diner was busier than ever. A charity banquet at the hotel across the street had ended early, sending dozens of customers into the restaurant. Everyone wanted food, everyone wanted service, everyone wanted attention. Emily moved from table to table with her usual smile, hiding the exhaustion behind her eyes. Daniel quietly washed dishes in the kitchen. As always, invisible. Near the back entrance, a luxury black sedan stopped for only a few seconds. A man in an expensive navy suit stepped out. He wasn't there to eat. He walked directly to the kitchen door. One of the cooks noticed him. "Can I help you?" The man smiled politely. "I'm looking for Mr. Daniel Carter." The cook laughed. "The dishwasher?" The visitor simply nodded. "He left something important." The cook pointed toward the kitchen. The man walked in. Daniel looked up. For the first time, the calm expression on his face almost disappeared. The suited man respectfully lowered his head. "Sir, you forgot this." From inside his briefcase, he removed a thick, cream-colored envelope sealed with dark blue wax. There was no company logo, only a single silver crest pressed into the seal. Daniel immediately took it. His voice became firm. "You shouldn't have come here. My apologies, sir. It couldn't wait." Daniel looked around. Thankfully, no one seemed to be paying attention. "Go, I'll handle it." The man nodded once and quietly disappeared through the back door, but someone had noticed. Emily. She hadn't heard the conversation, she had only seen the visitor, and the strange envelope. She frowned. Why would someone dressed like a corporate executive visit an old dishwasher? Before she could think further, another customer called her over. The mystery had to wait. An hour later, the dinner rush finally slowed. Daniel stepped outside into the alley behind the diner. Rain continued to fall softly. He carefully broke the wax seal. Inside the envelope, there was only one handwritten letter. No signature, no greeting, just a single sentence. "The board is losing patience. They expect your decision within 3 days." Daniel read it twice, then folded it again. His eyes drifted toward the city skyline. The tallest building stood above everything else, its lights reflected through the rain. For the first time in years, Daniel looked uncertain. Just then, Emily stepped outside carrying a trash bag. She stopped when she noticed him. "I'm sorry. I didn't know anyone was out here." Daniel smiled gently. "Sometimes the rain helps people think." Emily laughed, or hide. Daniel looked at her for a long moment. "That's true too." She noticed the envelope disappearing into his jacket pocket. "Everything okay?" Daniel answered after a brief silence. "Someone is asking me to return somewhere, and you don't want to." He looked toward the clouds. "I don't know." Emily tilted her head. "Isn't home where you're supposed to go?" Daniel smiled sadly. "Only if home is still the same place you left." His words confused her. Before she could ask another question, he changed the subject. How's your mother? Emily's smile faded. They're trying their best, but hospitals don't run on hope. Daniel quietly nodded. Sometimes, the deepest pain needed no explanation. The next day, news spread across Brookhaven. The city's largest company, Carter Global Holdings, was holding an emergency board meeting. Nobody knew why. Business reporters crowded outside the headquarters. Employees whispered in elevators. Executives looked nervous. One rumor spread faster than all the others. The chairman is finally coming back, but no one has seen him in 5 years. Some believed he was living overseas. Others claimed he had retired. A few even whispered that he was already dead. No one knew the truth, except Daniel. Back at the diner, Emily found something lying near the dishwashing station after closing, a folded piece of paper. She assumed it belonged to Daniel. Daniel, no answer. He was taking the trash outside. Curious, she looked at the front. It wasn't a bill, it wasn't a receipt. It was part of the letter. The bottom corner had torn away when Daniel opened the envelope. Only a few printed words were visible. Chairman, board meeting, Carter. Emily frowned. Chairman, board meeting, Carter. Could Daniel have worked for a company before becoming a dishwasher? Maybe. He had once been an office manager or a secretary. She smiled at the thought. It seemed like the only explanation. She carefully placed the paper back on the counter. It's none of my business, she whispered, and walked away. Daniel returned a moment later. His eyes immediately found the missing corner. He picked it up slowly, then looked toward the dining room where Emily had disappeared. A quiet smile crossed his face. She had seen it, but she hadn't read the rest. She respected boundaries. That mattered more than she could possibly know. Later that night, Daniel unlocked an old metal locker hidden in the basement of the diner. Inside, there were no clothes, no shoes, no personal belongings, only a small wooden box. He lifted the lid. Inside rested 3 objects: an old silver key, a faded family photograph, and a gold wedding ring. Daniel gently picked up the photograph. A little girl smiled beside a much younger version of him. He brushed away a layer of dust. His voice was barely a whisper. I haven't forgotten. I promised. Then he placed everything back into the box, locked it carefully, and switched off the basement light. Above him, the restaurant was silent. Across town, the lights inside Carter Global headquarters burned through the night. Executives waited, lawyers waited, investors waited. The entire city believed the richest man in Brookhaven had vanished forever. They had no idea. He had just locked away a photograph before returning upstairs to wash one last sink full of dirty dishes. 3 days. That was all the time left. Not for Emily, not for the restaurant, but for Daniel. The mysterious letter hadn't left his mind. Somewhere in the city, powerful people were waiting for an answer only he could give. Yet every evening, he still tied on the same faded apron. He still rolled up his sleeves, and he still stood over the sink washing dishes as if nothing else in the world mattered. Sometimes, the strongest people carry the heaviest burdens without letting anyone notice. That afternoon, rain gave way to bright sunshine, the restaurant filled with customers celebrating the weekend. Laughter echoed through the dining room, plates clattered, coffee machines hissed. Everything seemed normal, until a sleek black sports car stopped outside. A young man stepped out wearing an expensive designer suit and sunglasses worth more than most people's monthly rent. His name was Ryan Whitmore, the son of one of Brookhaven's wealthiest property developers. Everyone in town knew him. Not because of his kindness, because of his arrogance. The moment he entered the diner, the atmosphere changed. Best table. He snapped his fingers, and make it quick. Emily greeted him politely. Welcome, sir. I'll be right with you. Ryan barely looked at her. Hurry. I don't like waiting. Throughout the meal, he complained about everything. The steak wasn't hot enough. The coffee wasn't strong enough. The music was too loud. The air conditioning was too cold. Nothing pleased him. Still, Emily remained patient. She apologized. She smiled. She did her job. Daniel watched quietly from the kitchen doorway. His expression never changed. Finally, Ryan stood to leave. As he reached for his jacket, something slipped from his wrist. A luxury watch, solid platinum, covered in tiny diamonds. It hit the floor without him noticing. Daniel saw it immediately. After Ryan left, he bent down and picked it up. It felt surprisingly heavy. Any dishonest person could have sold it for a fortune, enough money to change their life forever. Daniel simply wrapped it inside a clean napkin. I'll return it, he said quietly. One of the cooks laughed. Seriously? Do you know how much that's worth? Another employee grinned. Sell it. No one would ever know. Daniel looked at them calmly. The value of an object never decides the value of a person. No one answered. About 20 minutes later, the restaurant doors burst open. Ryan stormed inside with 2 security guards. His face burned with anger. My watch! It disappeared! The manager rushed over. What happened, sir? My watch is gone. It was worth over $200,000. Every employee froze. Ryan looked around the room. His eyes landed on Daniel. The old dishwasher stood quietly beside the sink. Ryan pointed at him. It was him. The restaurant fell completely silent. Emily immediately stepped forward. You can't accuse someone without proof. Ryan smirked. Then search him. Mr. Lawson hesitated. Daniel, I'm sorry. But company policy, Daniel gently nodded. Go ahead, without arguing. He emptied his pockets onto a nearby table. An old wallet, a folded handkerchief, a few coins, the silver key, nothing else. Ryan crossed his arms proudly. I knew it. He's hidden it somewhere. Emily looked furious. This is wrong. Daniel quietly reached behind the counter. He picked up the neatly folded white napkin, then placed it on the table. Inside lay the platinum watch, perfectly polished, untouched. The entire restaurant became silent. Ryan's confidence disappeared. Daniel carefully lifted the watch. You dropped this. I was waiting for you to come back. Ryan stared at him, speechless. Several customers had witnessed everything. One elderly man slowly stood. You accused an innocent man. Another customer shook his head. You should apologize. The room filled with murmurs. Ryan reluctantly looked at Daniel. I'm sorry. Daniel smiled kindly. We all lose valuable things sometimes. Ryan reached for the watch, but Daniel didn't let go immediately. Instead, he turned the watch over. The back carried a small engraved message. To Ryan. Earn respect before success. Daniel quietly read the words, then handed it back. Ryan noticed, for the first time, he looked embarrassed. Those words had been engraved by his late grandfather. A man everyone respected, a man Ryan had slowly forgotten. Without another word, Ryan lowered his head, then quietly walked out. His security guards followed. No shouting, no threats, just silence. That evening, the employees couldn't stop talking about what had happened. I would have sold that watch, one cook admitted. So would I. Another laughed. Emily looked at Daniel. You never even considered keeping it. Daniel shrugged. If I had, I would have lost something far more valuable. What? She asked. He smiled. The ability to look at myself in the mirror. Emily laughed softly. You always have an answer. Daniel chuckled. No, I've just made enough mistakes to recognize the right choice. Those words stayed with her. As closing time approached, the restaurant phone rang. Mr. Lawson answered. Within seconds, his face turned pale. Yes, I understand. We'll prepare immediately. He hung up. Everyone looked confused. What happened? A cook asked. Mr. Lawson swallowed hard. We're getting unexpected guests tomorrow. Very important guests. Executives from Carter Global Holdings. The kitchen fell silent. The company might buy this property, so tomorrow, everything must be perfect. Daniel quietly continued washing dishes, as though he hadn't heard a single word. Emily noticed something strange. For just one brief moment, a tiny smile appeared on Daniel's face. Not surprise, recognition, as if he already knew why those executives were coming. She wanted to ask him, but something told her. The answer wasn't ready yet. Late that night, after everyone had gone home, Daniel walked alone to the basement. He opened the wooden box once again. This time, instead of the photograph, he picked up the old gold wedding ring. He held it tightly, his eyes filled with emotion. I've waited long enough, he whispered. Then he slipped the ring back into the box, closed the lid, and looked toward the ceiling. Tomorrow, the past would begin catching up with him, and for the first time in 5 long years, the richest man in Brookhaven would come face to face with the world he had walked away from. The night after the executives left, Rosewood Family Diner felt strangely quiet. The laughter was gone. The clatter of dishes had faded. Only the soft sound of running water echoed through the empty kitchen. Daniel stood at the sink, washing the last few plates of the day. To anyone passing by, he looked exactly like he had every other night. An old dishwasher, finishing another long shift, but inside his heart, a storm was beginning. Tomorrow would decide everything. Emily finished wiping down the last table. She stretched her tired arms and smiled. We survived another day. Daniel chuckled softly. One day at a time. Emily looked at him for a moment. You know, I've worked with you for months, but I still don't know much about you. Daniel kept rinsing a plate. What would you like to know? She smiled. Were you always a dishwasher? Daniel paused, just for a second. Then he answered, No. What did you do before? A faint smile appeared on his face. I made decisions. What kind of decisions? The kind that changed people's lives. Emily laughed. You make it sound mysterious. Daniel laughed with her. Maybe it is. Before she could ask another question, the restaurant phone rang. Mr. Lawson answered it. His expression changed instantly. What? Tomorrow morning? Yes, of course. He slowly hung up. Everyone looked at him. The executives are coming back. The final inspection. If everything goes well, the diner will officially become part of Carter Global Holdings. The employees cheered. Emily smiled. Daniel quietly lowered his eyes. He already knew. Later that night, after everyone left, Daniel walked into the restaurant's old storage room. Hidden behind a shelf was a narrow wooden door leading to a tiny basement. He unlocked it with the same silver key Emily had seen before. The room was small, simple. Dust covered the shelves. In one corner sat the old wooden box. Daniel opened it carefully. Inside were only three things: the faded family photograph, the gold wedding ring, and a worn leather notebook. He picked up the ring. Its surface had tiny scratches from years of wear. Inside the band, a message was engraved: "Forever begins with kindness." Daniel smiled sadly. "I still remember." His voice echoed through the empty basement. A memory flooded back. Years earlier, a younger Daniel stood in a small church. Beside him, a beautiful woman smiled through happy tears. She gently slipped the ring onto his finger. "If life ever changes us," she whispered, "promise me, you'll never let money change your heart." Daniel had smiled. "I promise." He had kept that promise. Even after becoming one of the richest men in the country, even after losing almost everything that truly mattered. The next morning, Brookhaven buzzed with excitement. News reporters gathered outside Carter Global headquarters. Rumors spread through every cafe and office. The chairman is finally returning. No one has seen him in years. Some say he disappeared. Others say he's seriously ill. Nobody knew the truth. And nobody imagined the man they were waiting for was already putting on an old gray apron inside Rosewood Family Diner. At the restaurant, Emily noticed Daniel seemed unusually thoughtful. "You okay?" He smiled gently. "I was remembering someone important, the most important person I ever knew." Emily didn't ask another question. Some memories deserved silence. Around noon, the black SUVs returned. This time there were even more executives. Some carried briefcases, others carried legal documents. The employees stood nervously. Mr. Lawson hurried to welcome them. "Everything is ready." The executives nodded politely. But instead of sitting immediately, several quietly looked toward the kitchen, searching, waiting. One young executive whispered, "Has he arrived?" The older executive replied, "He's been here all along." Inside the kitchen, Daniel calmly continued washing dishes. One plate, then another. Nothing about him suggested power, nothing suggested wealth, yet every executive who glanced toward him instinctively lowered their voice. Emily noticed it again. Something wasn't right. These powerful business leaders looked respectful, almost careful. Around Daniel, lunch service ended peacefully. As the executives prepared to leave, the oldest among them intentionally walked toward the kitchen. He stopped beside Daniel. Without attracting attention, he quietly placed a small sealed envelope beside the sink. No one noticed except Emily. Daniel didn't open it. He simply covered it with a clean towel. The executive whispered, "The board has gathered. They're all waiting." Daniel replied calmly, "They'll wait a little longer." The executive nodded respectfully. "As you wish." Then he left. Emily's curiosity grew stronger than ever. Who was this quiet old man? Why did important people obey him? And why did every conversation with him sound like he was the one in charge? That evening, Emily found Daniel sitting alone outside the diner after closing. He wasn't looking at the street. He was looking at the sunset. She sat beside him. "My mom always says, sunsets make people honest." Daniel smiled. "Your mother sounds wise." Emily sighed. "She's stronger than anyone I know." Daniel remained silent for a moment. Then he quietly asked, "If someone gave you everything you ever wanted, but asked you to leave behind the people you care about, would you do it?" Emily answered immediately, "No, some things are worth more than success." Daniel slowly nodded. "As I hoped." Emily looked at him. "What do you mean?" Daniel smiled gently. "Nothing." Just then, a black luxury sedan stopped across the street. A chauffeur stepped out. He looked toward Daniel. Their eyes met. The chauffeur respectfully lowered his head, then returned to the car without saying a word. Emily watched in confusion. "Do you know him?" Daniel stood slowly. "Sometimes, the past has a way of finding us." He looked one last time at the quiet diner, then whispered to himself, "Tomorrow, the truth can no longer stay hidden." Far across the city, inside the top floor of Carter Global headquarters, a long conference table was filled with nervous directors. One chair remained empty, the chairman's chair. No one dared sit in it. The oldest board member checked his watch and spoke quietly. "He'll come. He always keeps his promises." None of them realized that the man they were waiting for had just finished another shift washing dishes, and by this time tomorrow, the entire city would finally discover who Daniel Carter really was. The next morning, Brookhaven had never been so restless. Television news vans lined the streets outside Carter Global Holdings. Journalists adjusted their cameras. Employees stood near the entrance, whispering among themselves. For 5 long years, the chairman's office had remained locked. Every major decision had been delayed. Every annual meeting had ended with the same question: When is Mr. Carter coming back? No one had an answer until today. Across town, Rosewood Family Diner opened like any ordinary morning. Emily arrived early. She found Daniel quietly making coffee in the empty kitchen. "You beat everyone here again." Daniel smiled. "Old habits." Emily poured herself a cup. "I had the strangest dream last night." "Oh? You were wearing an expensive suit," Daniel laughed. "And did it fit?" She smiled. "Perfectly." They both laughed. For a brief moment, everything felt normal. Neither of them knew. It would be the last ordinary morning they would ever share. Around 10 o'clock, 3 black SUVs stopped outside the diner, then 3 more. Customers turned toward the windows. Employees froze. The restaurant became completely silent. The same executives entered, but this time, they weren't carrying contracts. They weren't carrying inspection reports. Instead, every one of them wore a small silver lapel pin with the Carter Global crest. Without ordering food, they stood together, waiting. Mr. Lawson hurried over nervously. "Welcome back. Is there anything I can do for you?" The oldest executive smiled politely. "Yes, we're here to meet someone." Mr. Lawson looked confused. "Our restaurant?" The executive nodded. "He works here." Every employee glanced around the room. Who could they possibly be talking about? Daniel quietly removed his apron. He folded it neatly, placed it beside the sink, then slowly walked out of the kitchen. The executives immediately straightened their posture. Emily noticed something strange. Every one of them looked nervous. The oldest executive stepped forward. In front of everyone, he respectfully lowered his head. "Good morning, Mr. Chairman." The restaurant fell into complete silence. No one moved. No one breathed. Mr. Lawson blinked. "What? Did you just call him?" The executive repeated himself. "Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to welcome back Mr. Daniel Carter, founder and chairman of Carter Global Holdings." For several seconds, no one spoke. A glass slipped from a waiter's hand. It shattered across the floor. Still, no one looked away from Daniel. Emily stared at him. Her lips trembled. This can't be real. Daniel looked around the restaurant, at the tables he had cleaned, at the people he had worked beside, at the sink where he had spent 5 years. Then he spoke quietly. "I'm sorry. I never wanted anyone to feel deceived." Mr. Lawson's face turned pale. You're the chairman?" Daniel nodded gently. "Yes." The manager stumbled backward into a chair. His hands shook uncontrollably. Every moment he had ordered Daniel around, every rude comment, every extra shift flashed through his mind. One of the younger cooks whispered, "I made him scrub my pans." Another covered his face. Oh no! Ryan Whitmore, who had come in for coffee that morning, stood frozen. The memory of accusing Daniel of theft burned inside him. He slowly lowered his head. "I judged him, without knowing anything." Emily couldn't find the words. She walked toward Daniel. "You mean you own Carter Global?" Daniel smiled softly. "I founded it." Her eyes filled with tears. "Then, why? Why would you wash dishes?" The entire restaurant waited for his answer. Daniel looked toward the old sink, then back at Emily. "Because I needed to remember." "Remember what?" Emily whispered. Daniel took a slow breath. "There was a time when success became more important to me than the people I loved. My company grew. My wealth grew. But my time with my family became smaller." He paused. His voice became heavier. "The day my wife died, she left me one final letter. The restaurant became silent. I had spent so many years building an empire that I forgot to build memories. Before she passed away, she made me promise something." Emily listened through tears. "What promise?" Daniel smiled sadly. She said, "If money ever becomes more important than people, walk away from it until you remember who you are." So I did. I left the board. I left the mansion, I left the title, and I came here. Everyone listened without making a sound. I wanted to work where people weren't impressed by money. I wanted to meet people who were kind, without expecting anything in return. His eyes slowly turned toward Emily, and I found one. Emily felt tears rolling down her face. "Me?" Daniel nodded. "The day you defended me, when everyone else laughed, I knew. The world still had people like my wife." Emily covered her mouth. She couldn't speak. The oldest executive stepped forward. "Mr. Chairman, the board is waiting." Daniel looked around the diner one last time. He picked up his faded apron, folded it carefully, and handed it to Mr. Lawson. "Keep this." The manager looked confused. "I don't understand." Daniel smiled. "This apron reminded me that every honest job deserves respect, no matter who wears it." Mr. Lawson began to cry. "I'm so sorry. I treated you terribly." Daniel gently placed a hand on his shoulder. "The greatest apology is becoming a better person." Outside, hundreds of reporters had already gathered. News had spread across the city. Cameras flashed the moment Daniel stepped through the front door. Microphones surrounded him. "Mr. Carter, where have you been for 5 years? Is it true you worked as a dishwasher? Why did you disappear?" Daniel looked back through the restaurant window. Emily was still standing beside the sink, smiling through tears. He smiled back, then turned toward the cameras. My answer can wait. He looked at the old diner one last time. First, I have someone to thank. And with those words, the richest man in Brookhaven climbed into the waiting car, but the biggest surprise was still waiting to be revealed. The black limousine slowly pulled away from Rosewood Family Diner. Television cameras followed it through the streets of Brookhaven. Breaking news alerts flashed across every phone in the city. Carter Global chairman found living as a dishwasher for 5 years. People stopped walking. Restaurants turned up their televisions. Office workers gathered around conference rooms. No one could believe what they were hearing. The richest man in town had been washing their dishes. Inside Carter Global headquarters, hundreds of employees lined both sides of the lobby. No one had ordered them to be there. They came because they wanted to witness history. The giant glass doors slowly opened. Daniel Carter walked inside, still wearing the same faded gray shirt, still wearing the same worn shoes. Silence filled the enormous building. Then, one employee began clapping. Another joined. Within seconds, the entire lobby erupted into applause. The sound echoed through every floor of the building. Some employees had tears in their eyes. Others simply smiled. Daniel acknowledged them with a gentle nod, but there was no pride on his face, only humility. The elevator doors opened on the top floor. The board of directors stood waiting. As Daniel entered the conference room, every director stood. No one remained seated. The oldest board member stepped forward. Welcome home, Mr. Chairman. Daniel looked around the room. Nothing had changed. The same polished table, the same leather chairs, the same view of the city, yet everything felt different. He slowly walked to the empty chairman's chair. For a long moment, he simply looked at it. Then, he pushed it back. I didn't come here to sit above anyone. He chose an ordinary chair beside the table instead. The directors exchanged surprised glances. That single action told them the man before them was no longer the same businessman who had left 5 years ago. Meanwhile, Emily couldn't concentrate. Customers congratulated her. Employees kept asking questions. Did you know? How long have you known him? Did he ever tell you? She answered every question the same way. No, I only knew him as Daniel. Deep inside, she felt guilty. She replayed every conversation they'd ever had, every piece of advice, every quiet smile, every mysterious answer. Now, everything finally made sense. Late that afternoon, a black luxury sedan stopped outside the diner. The same chauffeur stepped out. He walked inside and approached Emily. Miss Harper? She looked up nervously. Yes? He respectfully handed her a cream-colored envelope sealed with dark blue wax. The chairman asked me to deliver this personally. Emily stared at the envelope. The chairman? The chauffeur smiled. I believe you know him as Daniel. Before she could ask another question, the chauffeur quietly left. Her hands trembled as she opened the envelope. Inside, there was a handwritten letter. Daniel's handwriting was simple and neat. She began reading. Dear Emily, if you're reading this, then the truth is finally out. Thank you. Not for helping a wealthy man, because you never knew I was one. Thank you for helping someone you believed had nothing. During these 5 years, many people offered me respect only after discovering my name. You offered me kindness before you knew it. That is far more valuable. Tonight, if you are willing, I'd like to tell you why I came to Rosewood Family Diner in the first place. Meet me at the old Willow Lake Park. 7 p.m., Daniel Emily folded the letter carefully. She knew this wasn't the end of the story. It was the beginning of another one. As the sun began to set, Emily arrived at Willow Lake Park. Children laughed nearby. The lake reflected the orange evening sky. Daniel sat quietly on an old wooden bench, still dressed simply, still looking like the same humble man she had always known. She walked over and sat beside him. For a few moments, neither of them spoke. Finally, Emily broke the silence. You said there was something I needed to know. Daniel smiled faintly. There is. He reached into his coat pocket, not for the silver key, not for the wedding ring, but for the faded family photograph. He carefully handed it to her. Emily looked closely. A younger Daniel stood beside his wife. Between them, a little girl smiled brightly. She couldn't have been older than 6. Your daughter? Daniel nodded. Her name was Lily. Emily smiled at the picture. She looks happy. Daniel's eyes filled with tears. She was. A heavy silence followed. Then he quietly continued. 20 years ago. My wife and Lily were driving home from school. Emily listened without interrupting. It was raining. The roads were flooded. Their car lost control and slid into a ditch. Daniel closed his eyes. I wasn't there. I was in another city, attending a business meeting. His voice broke. The meeting couldn't wait. That's what I told myself. Emily lowered her head. Daniel continued. For several minutes, people drove past the accident. Nobody stopped until A young girl riding home on an old bicycle saw the crash. Emily looked up. The story felt strangely familiar. She was only 10 years old, Daniel said softly. But she didn't keep riding. She called for help. She stayed beside my family until the ambulance arrived. He smiled through tears. My wife survived long enough to tell me about that brave little girl. Emily whispered. What happened to her? Daniel looked into the distance. We searched for years, but we never found her. Emily looked back at the photograph. Her heart was racing. Something inside her didn't feel like a coincidence anymore. Daniel reached into his pocket one last time. This time, he unfolded a tiny, water-damaged newspaper clipping. On it was an old photograph. A little girl standing beside a bicycle. The image was blurry, but around the girl's neck hung a tiny silver butterfly pendant. Emily instinctively touched her own necklace. Hidden beneath her blouse was the exact same silver butterfly pendant, a necklace she had worn since childhood, a gift from her late father. Daniel noticed her hand freeze. His eyes widened. For the first time in years, he looked completely speechless. Could it be? Had he finally found the little girl his family had searched for? After 20 long years? Emily's hand slowly rose to her necklace. The small silver butterfly pendant rested against her palm. For years, she had worn it every single day. She had never taken it off, never questioned where it came from. It was simply part of her life. Daniel stared at the pendant. His hands began to tremble. His breathing grew heavier. For the first time, the man who had built one of the largest companies in the country looked completely overwhelmed. He reached into his coat pocket, carefully unfolding the old newspaper clipping once again. He placed it beside Emily's necklace. The two butterflies were identical. The same wings, the same tiny engraving, the same delicate design. Neither of them spoke. They didn't need to. Finally, Daniel whispered, "Where did you get this?" Emily looked down at the necklace. "My father gave it to me when I was little. He said, it belonged to my mother before she passed away. He always told me never to lose it." Daniel closed his eyes. A tear slowly rolled down his face. My wife had two of those pendants, one for herself, and one she wanted to give to the little girl who saved our family. Emily looked at him in disbelief. "What?" Daniel nodded slowly. The ambulance arrived just in time. My wife took off her necklace and asked the paramedic to give it to the little girl. She said, "If you ever meet her again, tell her she reminded me that goodness still exists." Emily covered her mouth. Memories she hadn't thought about in years suddenly returned. Rain, a damaged car, a crying woman, a little girl standing beside a bicycle. Her father's voice. "Stay with them. I'll call for help." She gasped. "I remember. It really happened." Daniel looked at her with tears in his eyes. "We searched for you. For years. My company hired investigators. We checked hospitals, schools, police records, but we never found your family." Emily smiled sadly. "We moved away only a week later. My father got a new job. We never came back. For 20 years, two lives connected by a single act of kindness had unknowingly traveled separate paths, until fate quietly brought them together again. The sun slowly disappeared behind Willow Lake. Neither of them noticed. They simply sat together, remembering, healing, finding answers that had taken decades to arrive. Finally, Daniel broke the silence. "Do you know why I really came to Rosewood?" Emily shook her head. "I wanted to meet people who still believed kindness mattered. I had wealth, I had success, but after losing my wife, I wasn't sure goodness still existed." He smiled warmly. Then one evening, a young waitress defended an old dishwasher that everyone else laughed at. "You reminded me of the little girl my wife never forgot." Emily wiped away her tears. "I didn't do anything special," Daniel smiled. "You did. You chose kindness. When there was nothing to gain. That's what makes it priceless." A week later, Carter Global Holdings held its largest press conference in company history. News reporters from across the country filled the auditorium. Cameras flashed continuously. Daniel walked onto the stage, not in an extravagant designer suit, not surrounded by bodyguards, but wearing a simple navy blue suit and the same old wristwatch he had worn at the diner. The applause lasted nearly a full minute. When the room finally became quiet, Daniel stepped to the microphone. "I disappeared for 5 years because I forgot something important. I believed companies were built with money. I was wrong." He paused. "They are built with people." Another silence. Then he continued. "I spent 5 years washing dishes, and I learned more about leadership beside a kitchen sink than I ever learned in a boardroom." Every person in the audience listened carefully. From this day forward, Carter Global will never judge a person by their title, but by their character. The room erupted into applause. Daniel then made one final announcement. Beginning immediately, every Carter Global employee, from janitors to senior executives, would spend one day every year working in frontline service jobs, cleaning, cooking, serving customers, listening, learning, because respect could never be taught from the top floor of an office. It had to be experienced. The decision became international news. Business schools called it revolutionary. Employees called it inspiring. Daniel simply called it common sense. A few days later, Emily received an invitation to Carter Global Headquarters. She arrived nervously. Daniel greeted her personally. He handed her a small folder. "I have something for you." Emily opened it carefully. Inside was a full scholarship to complete the nursing degree she had abandoned years ago. There was also a letter confirming that every remaining bill for her mother's medical treatment had been paid anonymously through the Carter Foundation. Emily looked up, her eyes filled with tears. "I can't accept this." Daniel smiled gently. "You're not accepting charity. You're accepting an opportunity. You once gave hope to my family without asking for anything. Allow me to honor that kindness." Emily embraced him. Not as a billionaire, not as a chairman, but as an old friend. Months passed. Emily graduated with honors. She became a nurse. Every day, she cared for patients with the same compassion she had shown in the diner. Her mother recovered slowly. Their small apartment was once again filled with laughter. As for Rosewood Family Diner, Daniel refused to buy it. Instead, he quietly renovated the building, raised every employee's salary, created a fund to help workers facing medical emergencies. But the restaurant remained exactly what it had always been, a place where ordinary people could feel seen. One evening, long after the renovations were complete, Emily visited the diner. She smiled when she looked toward the kitchen. The old dishwashing sink was still there. Above it hung a small wooden plaque. It read, "No honest work is ever beneath an honest person." No company logo, no golden signature, just those simple words. Customers often stopped to read them. Few knew who had written them, but everyone understood their meaning. Daniel visited from time to time. He would sit quietly in the same corner booth, drink a cup of black coffee, smile at the staff, and leave without asking for special treatment. To new customers, he looked like an ordinary elderly gentleman, exactly the way he preferred, because he had finally learned the richest person in any town is not the one with the biggest bank account, it's the one whose kindness leaves the greatest legacy. And sometimes, the greatest fortunes are never counted in money. They're counted in the lives we choose to lift.